Here we see the only existing image that remains of Bash, an unreleased fighting game by developer OrientalSoft that was first shown to the public through a Japanese gaming magazine in the year 2000. In this video, I'll be taking the limited information we have about Bash and trying to outline what it could have been, pulling a whole game out of a single image. The YouTube channel Guile Winquote recently did a video on an unreleased fighting game that actually got to see the light of day in the end. On Twitter, it spurred discussion of other unreleased fighters, and this is where I found out about Bash. For whatever reason, this pretty generic image captured my imagination. Barely 2 sentences of information exist about this game beyond what you can glean from just looking at the picture itself. There were apparently going to be 10 characters on the roster. We can see 2 of them, a male in red leather pants and a fishnet shirt named Sae, and a girl named Puffe. Or maybe Poof. Puffy? Anyways, who pairs Mickey Mouse shoes and knee socks with a skirt equipped with large shoulder bulbs, along with 2 cuffs around her wrists that attach to large cat paws. They're interesting looks if nothing else. The male character seriously reminds me of Remy from Street Fighter III Third Strike, itself only having been out for less than a year when Bash was shown, while the female character gives off vibes of Bridget from Guilty Gear X2, which wouldn't release until 2002. Also Elisa from Tekken, who first debuted in 2007's Tekken 6. Bash was said to use a 4-button control scheme and have several unique mechanics according to the unnamed webpage mentioning it, so that gives us something of a base when looking at what Bash could have been. For the sake of simplicity, let's say those 4 buttons would have been light and medium variants of punches and kicks, while pressing both kick buttons or both punch buttons would get you their heavy variants. Now we need to look at fighting games up to the year 1998, a rough estimate that allots 6 months for planning the game and 18 months for making it, to see what types of mechanics may have been labeled as unique given the standards of the time. Thankfully, the website Fighters Generation has an incredibly comprehensive year-by-year list of fighting game releases, along with overviews of every title. That was basically my bible for writing the first chunk of this script, so let's get a look at the environment Bash was being built in. Coming out of 1997, 3D fighters were large and in charge. Rival schools made a strong splash. Bloody Roar and Soul Calibur saw their first releases. And then there was Tekken 3, an absolutely gigantic hit. Meanwhile, the 2D space was experiencing some growing pains as 2 pillars of the genre hit rough patches. Street Fighter was struggling to attract audiences to its 2 SF3 titles released that year, New Generation and Second Impact. Following the final entry, Third Strike in 1999, Street Fighter wouldn't see another mainline release until 2008 with Street Fighter IV. Mortal Kombat was doing better, but not by much. Mortal Kombat 4 struggled out of the gate as the fall of the American arcade industry was in full effect, along with the game's move to 3D graphics betraying the series' reputation for photorealistic visuals. This, along with many fans viewing the gameplay as a step back from the strides taken with Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. But with the torchbearers stumbling, 2D fighters weren't without their fantastic releases that year. SNK was holding it down with a really good KOF 97 release. Darkstalkers 3 continued to innovate both visually and mechanically, and Marvel vs. Street Fighter gave players one last round of Capcom-made Marvel fighters before the Marvel vs. Capcom series officially kicked off. The main innovations in the 2D space around this time look to have been focused on pace. Aside from Street Fighter III, there seemed to be a very serious effort among major publishers to make games that valued faster action. Air dashing, chain combos, and the wildness of fighters with assist buttons and tag mechanics all emphasized a rapid pace of play. So if we're looking for a space where Bash could innovate mechanically, it's likely in that regard. But before we can innovate, we need a foundation. At its most basic level, what are the key mechanics Bash probably would have had? The look of this single image gives me hints of an almost G-rated Darkstalkers, a more playful and childish energy that still holds a significant amount of mechanical depth. Instead of movie monsters, the characters in Bash look to be based off of children's toys. I'm going to approach the game from this perspective and add mechanics that would be in line with that idea. I envision Bash as being the name given to a game that a brother and sister play using their toys. This will make more sense when we get into what the roster looks like, but I just wanted to set that stage here first. On to the gameplay. In regards to movement, we'd have jumps, super jumps, double jumps, run dashes, and air dashes. Those seem like a given. and the things I'd want to add to the game's universal movement options are making dashes cancelable into almost any move at any time, running back dashes that hold the same property, and wall jumps. I think bouncy and frantic best describe my vision for this game's movement, the options here being just a little extra even when compared to its fastest contemporaries. On the offensive end, I'm thinking a chain combo system, jump and super jump cancels off almost every move, supers and specials, a bunch of command normals, and throws. On the defensive end, we've got our basic block, grab breaks, and then everything else is fair game. For a genre that seemed hell-bent on pushing pace around this time, creating interesting defensive interactions within that frenetic environment seems like the best way to give Bash its own unique flavor. Some kind of burst/combo breaker mechanic feels like a great fit, attaching it to one of the game's many meters. One option could be to have the number attached to the meter be your burst amount. In a best of 5 rounds match, you're given a limited number of bursts, along with the potential of gaining more burst through doing certain things, like getting a perfect or landing the first hit in 3 consecutive matches. I think that would really fit the childish atmosphere. Those sound like little bonus rules that kids would come up with. Beyond that, my assumption is that OrientalSoft would likely steer away from implementing a parry mechanic given how poorly the trio of Street Fighter III games were selling around this time, with parrying as their big mechanical addition to the franchise. The meter is the most fascinating thing about this image. Using the green bar as our super meter makes the most sense. The game wants you to be moving and could encourage you to, in part, by having all movement build super meter. The blue gauge could be a 2-in-1, where using different mechanics pulls different amounts from both the horizontal blue flowing atop your super meter and the blue filling your burst counter vertically. It could be something like faultless defense when you're holding back plus a combination of buttons, and something that alters move properties when activated on offense. Then there's the ball riding around the burst counter that I'm thinking could have been tied to damage scaling, and here's where I can really reward defense. In contrast to Guilty Gear's risk gauge, which makes you take more damage once your guard is broken after blocking a bunch of attacks, I'd want to do the inverse, rewarding smart defense by allowing it to create powerful offense. This ball would rise the longer you remain blocking. The higher it gets, the more damage your attacks will do once you stop blocking. Now with the mechanics taken care of, I can get to what has been the most fun part of this script for me, designing the characters and the world this game inhabits. With Bash, I'm leaning toward thinking it was going to emulate Super Smash Bros. In terms of how Smash 64's UI centered on its characters being toys in a kid's room. While I was editing this script, I realized Smash 64 actually came out in January of 1999, so planning on emulating it in 1998 wouldn't have been possible. For the sake of this being easy on me, can we all just assume that OrientalSoft had the idea first? Okay? Cool, moving on. With the two characters on screen, it's very easy to see how similar they are to popular children's toys from around that time. Puff looks like someone mishmashed their Sailor Moon and Minnie Mouse figures together, and Sae looks like a WWF action figure of wrestler Christian, who was part of one of the company's biggest acts at the time. That gives me a base for constructing the other 8 characters along with the stages. The characters are toys, the stages are places kids would play with their toys, but with an added air of importance, an all eyes on us fantasy. The stage we're shown looks like kids playing with their toys at some resort while on vacation. The goal with the stages would be to have a good mix of ones that are places the kids would bring their toys, and ones the kids would make themselves at home. So others could include a campfire setting with a sort of kid horror atmosphere, a dollhouse, and a wrestling ring. On to the characters. But first, some breaking news! While editing this on and off for the past 18 months, some new images came to light through one of the people that worked on the game. The images reveal 4 other characters in a shot alongside Puff. This threw me for a loop, as it came after I'd already written and recorded everything for the potential characters, so having to go back and remodel the script wasn't something I wanted to do. Instead, I'll briefly go over the new characters and explain how they could fit into this model. On the far right, I'm imagining the guy with goggles being a street racer. The Need for Speed games started in 1994, Initial D got serialized in 1995, and drifting in general saw a massive boom in popularity in Japan during the 90s, so I could totally see kids wanting to add something like that to their made-up game. Next we have what looks like a monk who, by the screenshot on the far right, is dressed like Yun from Street Fighter. Honestly, that could just be what the kids were going for. They took a bald action figure, dressed him up like one of their faves from the new Street Fighter game, and made him their own. On to the left, the white-haired boy with fur on his shoulders could so easily come from the kids being fans of Inuyasha. That would work great alongside the rest of my ideas, giving the game its only sword fighter. Finally, the fancy-looking girl seems really similar to Puffe, which makes me think they'd be related or connected in some way. What if she was the kids' take on Nina Williams, given how incredibly popular Tekken was at the time? Perhaps a rogue secret agent. With that out of the way, let's first go over how Sae and Puffe would play. Inspired by pro wrestling action figures, Sae would be a brawler with a pocket full of command grabs. The popular styles of pro wrestling in both the US and Japan in the mid to late 90s had veered away from being heavy on actual grappling, which is why I think I can get away with letting this character not be a hard grappler, and have that be a secondary aspect of his kit. The push in the US with ECW, WCW, and the WWF was toward wild brawls that often involved weapons like chairs and tables. While one of Japan's most successful companies of the era, All Japan, centered its matches on strikes and suplexes that looked incredibly dangerous. Sae's special attacks are going to blend the two styles. On the All Japan front, he'd have a spinning elbow attack that emulates the company's biggest star, Mitsuharu Misawa, and a leaping head kick a la its second biggest star, Toshiaki Kawada. Then for the US stylings, since he looks like a Christian Cage action figure, I'm thinking his main specials would have to do with the TLC matches that Christian was a part of. Sae's quarter circle forward plus punch would grant him different angled chair shots, light being a push into the stomach, medium being a low angled overhead, and heavy being a shot to the head that also functions as an anti-air. His quarter circle back plus light punch and light kick would set up a table that he can put other characters through with grabs like a powerbomb, which would be doable in the air, and a back suplex. Spending some meter would let him set up a flaming table like the Dudley Boys had done in ECW and was commonplace in Japanese deathmatch promotions like FMW. I know this sounds unlike the kid-friendly motif I preached earlier, but there's a way around that. Instead of the table actually looking like it's on fire, you do what kids used to do when they wanted to create such a scene with their action figures. Color some fire on paper and tape it to the table. His super would have him knocking his opponent down, climbing a ladder, and doing a big dive onto them. Would a hyperviolent Beowulf from Skullgirls be a fair comparison? I'm not actually sure because I don't think we've ever seen hardcore wrestling represented in the fighting game space before. As for Puffe, I like the idea of her being a mix of Minnie Mouse and Sailor Moon, with all of her moves having some degree of sparkly elegance. Using her paws, Puffe would probably operate like a shorter range version of Dalsum, with the added angle of wanting to play at both far and close range. This would be because while her paw chains and projectiles give her good zoning, they'd come at the cost of damage. At close range, her paws combined with her fists to give her extra hits on a variety of attacks and thus higher damage potential. This character would be the prototypical glass cannon, the versatility of her offense coming at the cost of being one of the lowest health characters on the roster. Now with the other 8 characters, I tried to have a blend of relevant toys from that time period, along with some toys that transcend generations. When Bash likely started development, Pokémon was releasing its first movie in theaters and was the hottest rising kids property. So the first character I'd add is someone that uses trading cards to summon different puppet monsters. Doing a 4-1-2 input plus any of the buttons would have them laying down a card to summon a monster, so 6 monsters in total if we want to include options for heavy punch and heavy kick. Then a 7th super monster if they manage to successfully summon all 6 normal monsters during the course of a set. They'd wield their collection of cards like fans when attacking on their own, along with having the ability to summon a random monster while in block stun using a special move. A comparable character would be Zappa from Guilty Gear, alongside angles of Baiken and Anji from the same series, while their look would be a mix of Misty and Sabrina from the original Pokemon anime. As for their summons, basing all 7 of them off Kanto Pokemon seems like the easy move, but people creating their own custom Pokemon has always been a thing. The more realistic scenario seems like a 2-4 split. The kids each pick their favorite Pokemon to be one of the summons, then each draws 2 custom Pokemon to add to the pile. Scrolling through the Kanto Pokédex, it's enticing to just pick Pikachu and Charizard as the kids' favorites and call it a day. But I want to get weird, if only to imagine how summons based off other Pokemon would play. For the sister, her favorite Pokemon would be Exeggutor. Interesting thing with early Exeggutor cards, it had Teleport as one of its moves in the first release of the card game, so this otherwise slow summon could have a fast option, or be used to randomly swap it with another summon. The brother's favorite Pokemon is going to be Meowth, its summon being a quick little annoyance with the ability to throw coins from a distance. The 4 custom Pokemon they come up with are going to be left to the imagination at this point, because creativity is an exhausting endeavor. The rare super summon would be based on Ho-Oh, who at the time had only been seen in the first episode of the anime, being a complete mystery to Pokemon fans. Next comes an Army Man, one of the classic toys across every generation. In a game centered on speed, I'd want this character to be the antithesis of that, restricting his opponent's movements by riddling the stage with hazards like proximity mines and barbed wire fences. Though slower than most, they're capable of taking quite a beating before going down, giving them ample time to set the stage as they please and then punish their trapped opponents with a few long-range gun-based special attacks. The key with these gun specials is that they take a long time to charge up, meaning this character couldn't be played like you'd play Cable, for example, in Marvel vs. Capcom. To use their guns at their most effective, you'd first have to trap your opponent. Aside from their guns, most of their special moves wouldn't do damage directly, with that element being left to their normal attacks for the most part. This is a character you'd want to play at mid-range, because giving them space lets them put up a maze, and getting too close lets them use their fearsome strikes. Testament meets Solid Snake meets Brian Fury. Now, like Pokemon, a franchise that saw tons of success coming into the end of the 90s was Power Rangers. The Mighty Morphin series was doing incredibly well in English markets, while the series it was adapting to those markets, Super Sentai, was and still is a merchandising juggernaut in its native Japan. Having a character in that mold would have great multi-market appeal. This is our Dan Hibiki, a joke character full of campiness. But unlike Dan, I want this character to be good. They'd be a Shoto parody that makes fun of the archetype, as if the kids themselves found it funny that every game had someone that plays like Ken and Ryu. Their super would be them doing a massive mecha transformation that would be incredibly destructive. This character would change their name depending on what color you chose for them, as if the kids had a bunch of these figures and treated them as interchangeable. Red gives you Ryan, blue gives you Betty, etc., but their moveset would stay the same the whole time. The only other change would be the look of the mech they use during their super, not just in its color but in its entirety. Another timeless toy is the stuffed animal, with none more famous than the teddy bear. Especially after seeing Kuma in Tekken 3, it would make sense that these kids would want their own bear to get in on the action. This feels like the perfect character to be our archetypal grappler. With stubby limbs, playing at any range but up close is going to be a problem for it. The one exception would be some kind of slashing bite special move that extends out decently far, with the power of the button determining its angle. As for mobility, they'd be on the less agile end of things, along with having a low jump, the trade-off being that their jump would cover more horizontal space than most characters. They'd also be in the top 3 for total health among the cast, along with having 1 or 2 moves that have armor. Now we get to a character concept I'm shocked it didn't get experimented with during the 90s. How, with the rise of extreme sports, most mainstream of which being the X Games in 1995 and Tech Decks in 98, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was a 1999 release, did nobody say, let's give a character a skateboard and actually let them fight with it? Oh wait, Fighting Vipers did. Well, still, it should have been more of a thing. Picky from that game uses the skateboard like it was a stick, only involving it in his combos as an ending smack. What I'm thinking is a character that would ride their skateboard as a separate stance, gaining new options while on it. Their moves would mainly draw from freestyle flat ground skateboarding, which, alongside vert and pool skating, was one of the main ways people skateboarded before Rodney Mullen revolutionized street skating with his invention of the flat ground ollie in 1982. The trouble with integrating mid-80s to 90s era street skating is that it doesn't give you much to work with in a fighting game context in terms of attack variety, which now explains why this type of character probably wasn't explored more often despite its cultural relevancy. But with flat ground freestyle skating, you get something that looks a lot more like capoeira than modern skateboarding. People like Rodney Mullen, Steve Rocco, and Per Willander would blend a variety of balancing stalls, hand plants, and power slides into their competition routines. They'd ride into those moves and show off a flow in tight spaces that makes the style perfect for a fighting game stage. Incorporating modern skateboarding tricks into this character's arsenal would be a bit of a task, but it also seems doable. When facing off against someone like the Soldier, our skater's ability to ollie over their traps, potentially with a spin or flip trick that acts as a projectile deflection, could make for interesting counterplay. I've got a few other ideas for this character, like letting them use the corner walls as vert ramps and the different options that could open up, but I think it's best to move on now before I get too ahead of myself. Only 3 more fighters left to go, and it's at this point that I realized how annoying it is to find toys marketed toward girls. In my head, I was imagining these matches taking place between a brother and sister, only to search toys for girls and to be inundated with sameness. It was just a barrage of pink homemaker-esque playsets that pigeonholed girls into very specific spaces, with the only real exceptions being toys that get marketed as stuff you'd normally only see in the boys' toys aisle but now in pink. Toys for boys, in contrast, have always had incredible variety, and it made it very easy to make the initial list of character concepts based on stuff marketed toward them. This issue is why I went back and retroactively made the card summoner based on Misty and Sabrina, and added the color swap name swap stuff to the Power Ranger, because Puff being the only girl on a roster of 10 characters would have just been stupid. So where do we go from here? After some consideration, I've settled on this next character being based on Amelia Earhart. These types of Explorer action figures have been all over toy stores basically forever, plus the aviation bend gives me a lot to work with in crafting a character with both a stylish presentation and a unique playstyle. In her intros, she could fly into battle on a model plane or parachute down onto the stage, a tease of the unique air mobility she'll have in battle. As you'd expect from an aviator, she'll be most comfortable in the air. Have we ever seen a character whose entire game plan revolves around them doing normal jumps? I can't think of one, so first time for everything. Let's say this character has no grounded specials. All of her special moves are air only. With that in mind, Amelia would have 2 ways to modify her jumps and make her tricky to time with your anti-airs. The first would be her aforementioned parachute, significantly slowing her fall speed, being cancelable into command air normals and other special moves, and coming with a unique special move of its own that would see her throwing an item down at the opponent. The second would be a dive that increases her fall speed, again coming with a unique special move, this time being one that sees her sliding on the ground and hitting low. And of course, she'd have a dive kick as a command air normal. Along with being able to cancel into dive kick off parachute, she'd also be able to cancel out of dive kick into quick roll. Basically, you don't want this character to jump, because it's gonna be prediction hell, and that's without me filling out the rest of her special move list. Ideally, it would also include an air grab or 2 and a linear projectile of some kind, maybe one where she flicks off a pair of aviator sunglasses at her opponent. Up next would be a take on one of the 90s biggest cultural icons. Assuming this game would have begun development around mid-1998, Michael Jordan would be playing in the NBA playoffs amid the dynastic Chicago Bulls' famous final season together, so a basketball-playing fighter could have easily been on the concept board. The ultra-popular Slam Dunk manga, which did a lot to raise Japanese interest in basketball, had only concluded 2 years prior. And while not being super common, mass-produced NBA figurines have been a thing since the early 90s. While in battle, this fighter would be constantly dribbling, with the ball getting a colored outline when it becomes part of an attack. This is a character I have a lot of ideas for, so bear with me. The biggest of those ideas would be a back turn stance that emulates posting up. With the punch buttons, you'd be able to do different bumps like someone trying to get better position near the basket. This would allow for what I affectionately call a Shaq Rekka, consisting of a bump with the hips, a turning elbow to the upper body, and a violent dunk to finish things off. The turning elbow would take you out of post-up stance and allow the character to do a snatchback crossover if they didn't feel like finishing the sequence. The kick buttons would do different types of shots from the post-up stance. Michael Jordan's fadeaway with the light kick, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's skyhook with the medium kick, and shot faking with the heavy kick, which opens up a tree of attacking options, like a Kevin McHale-esque up and under multi-hit sequence. I'd want to load this character up with references, as if the kids playing with it were emulating their favorite NBA stars. MJ, Shaq, Tim Duncan, Allen Iverson, and there'd have to be a Rekka sequence called the Dream Shake. Despite being the most boring player named, Tim Duncan could offer this character an interesting bend. His signature move was the bank shot, about the most basic shot you can think of. With no backboard to bank off of, the shot would now bounce off the wall or ceiling of the stage, setting the stage for bank shot set play. Different costume colors would obviously emulate those of the Bulls, Lakers, Spurs, and 76ers, along with the Sonics and Knicks for further color variety. Their ball would be the red, white, and blue basketball popularized by the ABA, a rogue league throughout the late 60s and mid 70s that helped create massive innovations not only in how basketball was played, but also in how it was marketed. I need to stop with this character because I am a massive basketball history nerd and could probably go on forever. Here's one more. Let's see if anyone gets it. This character should have a secret super move that uses a 2-4-8-3-1 input. Comment down below if you know what this is referring to. The last character on the roster would be a true result of childhood creativity. What could you do if you didn't have a toy that fit your idea for a fighter? You could make them yourself, and that's how we get a character made out of Play-Doh. Basically 12 from Street Fighter III Third Strike, my favorite fighting game character ever. But we'll assume that Bash took the idea from 1994's Clay Fighter, since Third Strike was a 1999 release. It would still make complete sense though. If you could build a fighter out of Play-Doh, you absolutely would, and you'd give it all kinds of stupid abilities. It just so happens that this character's moveset would have a striking resemblance to 12's, but, be functional. With the roster filled, where would these toys be fighting? Stage design is an integral part of fighting games, and with Bash, there should be around 12 to 15 options, offering a blend of stages that look created by the kids, and stages inspired by realistic places the kids would play with these toys. Examples of this would be a stage that's set in the back of a moving car, and a wrestling ring with a bunch of other toys in the background as an audience. With characters and stages like this, the rest of the game needs to build the same atmosphere. To do that, I'd propose the character select screen be a shelf in the kids' room where they've stood up all of the toys they use in their little game, inspired by Fatal Fury 3's character select screen that does something very similar. I really like this idea, but it also makes one of my core UI philosophies difficult to implement. I believe that every character select screen should give you some sort of info on how the character plays, so that new players have an easier time picking who they want to use based on more than just looks. Guilty Gear Strive does this fantastically, and is probably the most kid-like way I could see this being implemented. Below each character, these kids could place a little note with something cool written about them, which reveals their broad gameplay identity. The stage select screen is a different story. This screen would be a scrapbook of both stages the kids have created and ones they've been to. When one of the time-sensitive locations is selected, one of them will say that they wish they could fight there again or something like that, and one of their parents will then conveniently say they have to go to said location. The kids get excited, grab their toys, and go. As for game modes, I really think the arcade mode could be something special. It gives me the space to play with the game's identity and make future added characters mean something more than just extra characters. One thing I've always been a big fan of in fighting games is non-playable boss characters. Master Hand, Abyss, Apocalypse, all stand out greatly and make their modes feel special because you're not able to see them anywhere else. Their intensity and importance isn't watered down by you playing against them in versus mode regularly. Boss characters in Bash should be fought on displays in toy store levels, as if the kids are taking their one chance to battle this otherwise unplayable toy before they have to go home. This makes any DLC or upgraded version of the game with added characters make sense. Why are the boss characters now playable? The parents bought them. Why are they not as strong as before? Because the kids wanted to keep it fair with the rest of their toys and self-balanced. There's an in-universe reason for everything, and that could even include the options for home mode and toy store mode when the boss characters get added to the roster, with only the home versions playable in online ranked. Bonus modes, both in and out of arcade mode, also make total sense. These characters are their fighter toys, but they're also their regular toys. The potential for different games these kids could come up with for their superpowered figures is endless. Even a tutorial makes sense, treating it like they're teaching someone how to play this game they love so much. a parent, a friend, a babysitter, hell, even their dogs. The fun with Bash is seeing how the modes in fighting games that we've known for so long can be adapted to this specific kind of universe. That's what kept me writing this script. This has been my take on Bash, the game that never was. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I've actually made multiple videos like this before, so check out the custom games playlist linked on the left. Thanks for watching!